This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 43, Opeth, Part 2.
welcome to part 2 of Opeth here on the Requiem Metal podcast. That was the funeral portrait from the Blackwater Park album. And this is Jason.
I'm Mark, and joining us again is
Chris.
Chris, our resident Opeth expert. And we were just
Opeth scholar.
Professor Dockin and Opeth scholar. So if you've been joining us the last few weeks, you've of course heard some nice guest appearances from Chris. Of course, last week you heard the My Dying Bride Part 2, and then Professor Dockin 2 weeks ago, right, Chris?
Yeah, that was quite a podcast.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I had a good time with that. So, Funeral Portrait is a song you picked because it's kind of one of the less recognizable tunes from Blackwater Park.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not Bleak, it's not Harvest. It doesn't have Stephen Wilson on it, at least that I know of.
Yeah, and of course Blackwater Park, kind of
their Watershed record.
And it features Steve Wilson from Porcupine Tree, his mass involvement, which he will be involved with the next 3 records, right? This, Deliverance, and Damnation.
Right.
Okay.
So he's involved in his 3 records, yeah.
Yeah. So, and Steve Wilson from Porcupine Tree, if you're not familiar with Porcupine Tree, you should
shame on you.
Do yourself a favor and look into that. And I'm sure somewhere down the road we'll do a Porcupine Tree show of some sort. So,
right.
And but Blackwater Park, this album really blew Opeth up, in my opinion.
Not like a Suicide Bomber, but
yeah. Because I'm sure that's what everyone was thinking.
When you say blew up,
yeah, that's true. That's true.
I think the exposure
metaphorically.
Okay, I think the exposure for this record was massive for them. This is sort of the first record where they toured incessantly.
US. Yeah,
they toured with a lot of different bands: Amorphous, Nevermore. Trying to remember if they toured with anyone else.
And this is their first appearance here in the States.
On a tour, yes. Yeah, right. They had played the Milwaukee Metal Fest, and they had played the New Jersey Metal Fest, which was the kickoff date for the Blackwater Park tour with Amorphous. That's
true. And we had seen them at that Milwaukee Metal Fest, which Mark and I had made reference to the epicness of how great that Metal Fest was, with it being Anathema, Opeth, and Catatonia, and Enslaved. Yeah, and there was Children of Bodom. I mean, that was a
Zyklon.
That was a heck of a Zyklon. I think was Entomb there.
I think so.
I think that was when Entomb was there as well. And they played King Diamond. The middle of the day. Yeah, but King Diamond was previous years. I think. Okay. Yeah. But anyways,
whatever. It was a good show.
It was a good time had by all. And the Jersey festival in particular is where a lot of memories kind of pour out, because you were involved as. Didn't Relapse send you along with Amorphous and Opeth to kind of explain, I guess, your involvement or how that kind of all came about?
Well, I think, first of all, for the record, I was asked to write the bio for the label so they could send it out with press release. So I did the bio, worked with Mike on the bio, and then Relapse needed someone to do merch for them for the Amorphous tour. So they asked 2 guys from the office. It was myself and a publicist at the time, Carl Schultz, to help do merch, help load in whatever, just logistical stuff. Because I guess they wanted someone from the label watching the band, so they didn't
fall asleep, or
what?
So they didn't fall asleep,
or get too involved in WWF viewing,
right? So anyway, that was the dates through Canada, at least that I was involved on. That was the Montreal show, the Toronto show. I think that's
no Mighty Vancouver.
I didn't go out west.
Winnipeg.
Didn't do Winnipeg.
Edmonton. It's late at night.
No, there's a couple. I think there's like 2 or 3 dates in there, but I can't remember which ones they were.
Oh.
But that was we got to tour with in the same bus with Amorphous and Opeth so each night I got to hear them play those songs over and over and over, and each night I got to stay up till 5:30 in the morning with Amorphous while they drank themselves out of their mind and smoked probably about 8,000 packs of cigarettes.
Awesome.
In the bus?
In the bus.
Yeah, that must
have people around the bus, like 15, 20 people?
Yes. So there was
nothing like 15, 20 sweaty Nordic men smoking cigarettes and drinking mass amounts of alcohol.
Occasionally the porno would come on and they'd all ooh and ah over that. But invariably, the first thing they want to do was break out the vodka, break out the hard liquor, get drunk, and sit there and stare at each other.
Uncomfortable.
You could smell the sexual tension. God.
Invariably what would happen is, members of Opeth would peel off and go to their bunks and get sleep, leaving the Finns hanging out in where we were sleeping, actually. We were sleeping in the front of the bus on the seats, Carl Schultz and I. So we couldn't go to bed till they left, and I don't think they got the hint that that was the case. So they would just sit there and down shot after shot after shot of vodka, smoke cigarette after cigarette until they basically fell asleep in their seat. In which case, one member of Amorphous, preferably the least or the most sober of the drunks, would carry the rest of them back, to their bunks.
Brothers in arms. That's what metal's all about right there.
So we would get to sleep at 5:30, and then we would, by the time 6 o'clock rolled around, the sun would come up, and we'd be awake. So it was interesting.
So fond memories indeed. Fond memories indeed.
It was a professional driver.
Chartered guy.
Yeah, chartered bus, chartered driver. Nice guy.
Poor guy, man.
Yep.
Yikes.
The bus drivers always have a little bit of fun. They get to joke with these guys and, tell stories of who they drove around, where they drove around. Maybe they drove Winger. I don't know.
Nothing more exciting than driving Winger around on a world tour.
Allman Brothers or whoever.
There's some drug users right there,
Okay.
so that'd be good stories.
Or Doobie Brothers.
Yeah.
Right.
Look out.
Either way, the bus drivers always have driven around people, so they always have stories to tell, and everyone wants to hear them. But the cool thing about being on that tour was, connecting with the band, Opeth. Not so much Amorphous, because I think they said about 5 words the whole time.
Yeah, I had them in my apartment when I was down in Pennsylvania, and all they wanted to do is listen to Danzig and drink.
Well, and I remember even doing the Amorphous interview for Eclipse back in the day, and I interviewed the bass player who was relatively new to the band at the time. It was the Am Universum record, and
Nicholas?
He had nothing of, like I would ask him challenging questions, and he'd sort of like kind of be like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm not quite sure," And I mean, nice guys, but kind of strange. But
anyway, getting back to the topic.
Mark and I have our own sort of shared Opeth memories around this time too, because of course we were out at that Jersey festival, which kicked off the tour that Chris was sort of talking about,
right.
And when we first arrived, we had driven all night. First of all, from Michigan into Philadelphia, slept at your old apartment on the floor, and then we got up and transferred over to Jersey. Right. Saw kids killing somebody in a 7-Eleven parking lot.
With a trash can.
Yeah, with a trash can, Godfather style. It was pretty wild stuff, and we were located near the wonderful resort town of Asbury Park, which looks like
Asbury is
the nuclear holocaust has just sort of stopped by and left gay bars, and that's about it. And burned out buildings.
Yeah, the Stone Pony.
Stone Pony. But not that there's anything wrong with that, right?
Exactly.
But we got to our hotel, checked in, then we went and got some food, and when we came back, of course, Opeth and Amorphous were sitting around in our hotel room in their underwear watching wrestling, and they were kind of shocked as to why we had opened up their hotel room door, and there was some kind of mix up with Relapse, and anyways, it was pretty entertaining. That was the beginning of our kind of adventures, and then we of course got our own hotel room, and then the next morning we were all at the hotel together, and we had a nice continental breakfast and in the hotel lobby, and it was all metal people and stuff. And of course, the guy I was living with at the time, our old roommate, we've talked about, worked on the Eclipse magazine with the three of us. Brian Allen witnessed. Were you standing next to him when this happened, or was it okay? Apparently, Michael had got out a carton of milk and was pouring some cereal or something like that, and dropped the entire carton of milk on the ground. Kind of looked both ways to sort of see if anyone from the hotel staff was watching, and then quietly slid it underneath the counter with his foot and just pretended nothing had happened. So it was kind of a brilliant moment.
Way to go, Mike.
Yeah, so that's a rock star. You got to either destroy your hotel rooms or mess up the continental breakfast at the hotel. Yeah. I think that was the beginning of not only his rock stardom, but also the beginning of his mustache growing, which was a
fiasco.
Yeah, it was just like a 7-year process to finally get a fully formed mustache there.
Right. Which he's got a lot of ribbing in the past for after. So,
well, we love it. And Michael was a good guy. And actually, I ended up. I think the next night, it was the night after they played or the night before they played. I can't remember. I actually got a nice opportunity to take those guys out in my mom's old Chevy Lumina to like a Bennigan's, and it was so funny because these guys are all like 6'4", and so their knees were just like in their
like a little sports car guy.
Oh yeah, their knees were like jammed into their chins, like 3 guys packed in the back seat, and it was.
You'll get them some Turkey O'Toole's.
Yeah, and some
some Monte Cristos.
Yeah. So there are a lot of really great memories associated with this record and with this tour and things like that.
And as crappy as the Metal Fest was, like where it was a really memorable time.
Yeah, it was a really neat time. So, but back to the music a little bit. Funeral Portrait. Any fun or interesting memories about why in particular this track jumps out to you, or?
Well, I think the opening is a bit different for them. It's very sort of up-tempo, almost happy, so it kind of bops along. And then it goes through, obviously a bunch of very Opeth-like phases. But I think Mike's vocals on the song are really quite something. I mean, if you listen to it on headphones, the CD version of it, not the MP3, or if you have a wave, you can do that as well. Mm-hmm. But I think if you listen to the CD on a good pair of headphones, you can really hear the depth and the range of his vocals and how scary he is sometimes. Do
you think Steve Wilson from Porcupine Tree, I mean, what musical impact do you think he had? Because Blackwater Park sounds so different than Still Life in so many ways. You know, I mean, what kind of jumps out to you, I guess, is
I think, Steven Wilson definitely had an impact, from a production standpoint, I think, but musically, I think Mike really listened to Steven when Steven would make suggestions, because I think Mike appreciated or looked up to Steven as a musician. So
yeah, they were both fans of each other's music,
right? And I think I think so. Whenever Steven would suggest something, maybe Mike would listen and alter
kind of pushed him vocally too, don't you think?
Right? Yeah, and I think he became more a confident vocalist as a singer rather than a growler. Mm-hmm. But I think everything sort of evolved in lockstep. I mean, you heard Martin Lopez. His drumming evolved. You heard Martin Mendez's bass playing evolve. You heard, the guitar player Peter evolve as well. So you started hearing everyone sort of was evolving at the same time. And then the songwriting was also evolving and getting better and more accessible. I mean, like Harvest, for example, or Bleak. Mm-hmm. I mean, both those songs are very instantaneous for a lot of people, and that's probably why this record kind of, for Opeth, kind of exploded.
Yeah, and then,
or as you said, blew up.
Yes. The title track and a couple other moments throughout the record, it seems like vocally when he sings death metal, it was almost more extreme though too. So it was a matter of these different dynamics, these more accessible songs and these more accessible moments in songs like Drapery Falls or Harvest or Bleak or whatever we're talking about. Yeah. But then when he's really going for it on like Blackwater Park, I mean it's bombastic. I mean it's really in your face, very heavy. And I don't know if that was sort of the extremes that Steve Wilson was pushing Michael towards, or
yeah, I don't know how much Steve pushed Mike. I mean, I think it was more suggestions, and I think again Mike listened to those suggestions and was able to execute those ideas, in a reasonable time, in a reasonable fashion. So, I don't think it was Steven putting tons and tons of pressure on Mike to perform. Mm-hmm. I think it was ideas being presented and Mike simply being able to do them.
Well, I think the influence went both ways. You listen to those couple of Porcupine Tree records after his involvement, and there's definitely a lot more metal influences. Even Opeth riffs almost in some of those.
Sure.
And even Michael from Opeth has shown up to play guest solos and things like that on some of the more recent Porcupine Trees. So. Right. But Steve's influence.
There was actually a Porcupine Tree track which never got made. I think it was called Cut Ribbon. Which had double bass on it. It sounded very Opeth in a way. And
the tune from that rare EP, was it Rapture? It's very heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, which they played live actually. When I saw them on the Damnation tour, when Porcupine Tree and Opeth played, it was funny because Opeth was playing all their mellow stuff, and Porcupine Tree went out of their way to play everything that was heavy.
Yeah.
It was kind of cool. But Wilson's influence will continue, especially on the next two records, and we're going to get into the first of the two, and they really need to be talked about almost as a pair, so I don't want to say too much about it yet, but the next kind of traditional Opeth metal record that comes out after Blackwater Park was a few years later in 2002, and that was Be Deliverance, and we're going to hear a song called By the Pain I See in Others, and this is a personal favorite of yours. I mean, tell us just a little bit about the song before we hear it, and then we'll talk about the record when we come back.
Sure, it's a song. I think again, it's different. It's obscure, I think, by Opeth standards, and I think it's one of the first songs where you actually feel kind of icky after listening to it. There's just something kind of slimy or strange about it, otherworldly, inhuman. So when you kind of hear it, especially in the beginning, his vocal treatments and what he's saying, you just sort of feel, whoa, this is kind of, I don't want to be around it. But at the same time, it's Opeth, so you still want to be around it.
And with that, here's By the Pain I See in Others from the Deliverance record. Enjoy. By the Pain, I See in Others from the Deliverance record, which kind of came as a... Deliverance was part one of two two records that were released by Opeth this year, and it was pretty interesting, the dynamics of it. And I actually stumbled across this when I was in Europe. I got it in Paris, and so I think I had like the European Digi, and I remember emailing, I think you, and I don't know if I emailed you, but I was like, dude, I've got this, and you guys were like, it's not out yet. I mean, you probably heard an advance of it or something like that, but I kind of stumbled upon that. I was pretty lucky to be over there. But tell us a little bit about, you had contact with Michael around this time, and he was obviously trying to do a lot of different things by putting out 2 records in 1 year. Right.
If I remember correctly, I actually broke the story on digitalmetal.com. He had talked about doing a concept album or a double disc. 1 album light, 1 album heavy. And I think at the time he didn't even have titles for them yet, and he wanted to transpose the meaning of the albums to so for Damnation
it would be mellow,
right? Yeah. For Deliverance it would be heavy,
the heavy one, yeah.
So when he originally told me about these, he was like, I'm going to do 2 records, a double album as a concept, 1 heavy, 1 light, sort of to split the sort of the typical Opeth things into 2 distinct albums. Whereas Deliverance, the heavy album, wouldn't have as much light stuff, the acoustic stuff, the singing. It would be almost like a pure death metal record. And the other one wouldn't have any death metal at all. And I thought that was kind of a cool concept. And when Deliverance first landed, it was... I remember hearing it, and I was actually quite... it was very death metal.
Well, yeah, especially like Master's Apprentice is like Morbid Angel all the way.
Well, I think there's a lot of Morbid Angel on there. Excuse me.
But he kind of cheated a little bit because the song that we're going to hear next, "A Fair Judgment," is not. Well, I mean, it's very metal, but
that is the song that is the most Opeth out of all of them.
Yeah.
If you listen to Wreath, for example, a lot of people like Wreath just because it kind of sounds militant. It has this very evil kind of quality to it. And then there's the title track, which everyone loves, the end sort of breakdown, the syncopated breakdown with the build.
They play that live pretty often.
That sort of replaced Demon of the Fall as sort of the closer now. They'll play Demon of the Fall somewhere in the middle now and play Deliverance at the end.
At the very end. Because of that syncopated ending, which is, kind of instrumental for...
Right, and a lot of people compared that syncopation to, say, Meshuggah at the time, just because Meshuggah were noted for doing this sort of very mathematical kind of thing.
Bah.
But, Deliverance was definitely a record that was kind of an ugly record for me. It was very, brutal and almost militant in a way.
I kind of liked it in a refreshing sort of way. I
really liked it, yeah.
I mean, it still holds up as one of my favorites.
I would agree with that, yeah.
I probably go to it more than I do Morning Rise.
Right, and I think soloing on this record, if you listen to the solo in Wreath, I think that he's pretty inspired. He's, the fireworks are kind of coming in all different directions.
Well, that solo in Master's Apprentice is amazing too.
Yeah.
It kind of comes out of nowhere because the song's so methodically, crushing, and then it goes into this wonderfully... dynamic solo, it's almost, Opeth's all about dichotomy, if you haven't figured it out by now, know.
There's one thing we haven't mentioned either. Master's Apprentice is a Australian rock band.
Good one at that.
Yeah, good. Very...
Kind of kind of got the garage rock thing sort of happening. Absolutely, yeah. Stooges rock, MC5 kind of connection.
Just like Blackwater Park, the title of the album was the title of a German rock band with a English singer. I kind of like those bands, like Who's First Friend, for example. But I think this is an interesting record. For Steve Wilson to have been involved in a almost a pure death metal record is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and then the we're going to hear a tune from Damnation, which will follow, which is In My Time of Need. What are your thoughts on Damnation?
Damnation was kind of interesting because I was in Sweden at the time when I heard it. I was actually in his house. He asked me if I wanted to hear it. Of course, I was. Well, yeah, of course.
Oh, maybe.
And I think at the time it was unmixed. It was unmixed at the time. And I don't think it had titles. Maybe he knew the titles, but I remember hearing Window Pane, and I was pretty much blown away. I was like, wow, this is going to be a great record, because it kind of reminded me of, I don't know, a mix of mostly Camel. It had a lot of Camel aspects to it, a lot of...
there's one tune on there that really has a Can feel. It's the one that gets really like out there. It's either, is it Closure? That or is it Death Whispered a Lullaby, which has a lot of organs and a lot of like kind of cosmic things sort of happening, and the drums is the one with the awesome like percussion piece and stuff like that.
Right, Closure, yeah.
And see, as much as I love this record, don't get me wrong, there's never been an Opeth record I haven't loved. To me, it's like I almost wanted them to go a little bit more out. Like, I wanted them to do the kind of stuff that they do on Lotus Eater. I was looking for something like that, like, get really out there, Right. Because I'd heard, stuff on Harvest and Benida. I mean, I knew that they were capable of writing, tangibly great melodic songs. But I kind of wanted to really see them kind of explore their prog roots a little bit more, and just get really crazy. But I don't know. So to me, it was great, but it was safe as well.
Not enough,
yeah.
I think I can agree with you, but at the same time, I don't. I mean, I think you have a band that hasn't gone out there before, hasn't put out an album full of non-death metal songs, has only sort of done that in bits and pieces. And I think that for a band to put out an album full of it is a bit adventurous. I mean, especially when you consider what's actually on here. I mean, To Rid the Disease, Weakness. I mean, there's a lot of openness and a lot of vulnerability in this record, which you don't really hear in any of the other records, even Watershed.
Sure.
You hear it maybe on Coil, for example. So in that regard, I think it's very unique. And I think, obviously the musicianship's great.
I think maybe that, especially like where Mark and I were at that point, we were pretty musically explorative at that point. I mean, we were listening to a lot of non-metal stuff, and so I think we were always ready and willing for a band to just really shed and just go, Find Day to Die, Anathema, just stuff like that. It was just totally... Find Day to Exit, Find Day to Die. Either way. Which they drew upon, but we won't get to that. But, I think we really wanted, like, get wild and crazy, and so...
Yeah, we're listening to Can and a bunch of just kind of out there stuff.
And it's nothing on Opeth, because you're right. I think you're right, absolutely right in saying that for a death metal band to go out and make this record is incredibly experimental.
Well, and we were, at the time, we were lucky in the fact that, like, Last Fair Deal Gone Down, Last Fair Deal Gone Down was, it kind of, like, mirrored our musical, direction at the time. So we were experimenting with these bands.
The Catatonia podcast,
So we kind of, it's kind of an unrealistic expectation to have every band you like do that, but
we're critics.
That was in our,
hard to please.
In our head at the time.
We're kind of bastards that way,
Right.
So, but they're both great companion piece records, and I mean they both hold up in their own right.
Right. I mean, I think this is Mike's Camel record. He was heavily into Camel. It still is, but I think this is his attempt to write a Moon Madness, not so much Moon Madness, maybe like a Snow Goose or
a Mirage
type record. I mean, he was he was really influenced by Camel.
Yeah.
Andy Latimer and Peter Bardens. So I mean, this I think this is really his Camel record. I mean, he may not admit it, or maybe he will, but that's kind of my my interpretation of it. It's kind of all those sort of almost progressive soft rock kind of things, smooth symphonic rock kind of all pushed together in a sort of a dark,
It's a great modern interpretation of a 70s progressive rock record.
Right. Yeah. So, and of
through
course,
a metal lens.
right. But I think you started looking at how everything's black and white. Travis Smith did a great job on sort of creating almost like a 70s kind of horror.
Well, you got the dichotomy of image as well.
Right.
For the heavy record, we've got like a doll head on the front of it.
Or the mellow one, you mean?
Mellow one.
Oh,
the mellow one.
Yeah. Because the heavy one seems more peaceful looking.
Right.
And that's kind of what they're going for. Right. So, all right. Well, let's get to the music. We've got Fair Judgment, which is the second track we'll hear from Deliverance, and then we'll end things with In My Time of Need from Damnation. So enjoy.
Into deep faith. Leave it be, it was meant for me. Soul sacrifice, forgot the advice. Lost track of time in the flurry of smoke. Waiting anxiety, a fair judgment is served. excited me apart from the core of my soul. Somewhere is miles and miles away. No one would ask me to stay. And I should contemplate this change to ease the pain. And I should step out of the rain and turn away. At times the dark's fading slowly, but it never sustains. Would someone watch over me in my time of need? Somewhere is miles and miles away. No one would ask me to stay. And I should contemplate this change to ease the pain. And I should step out of the rain and turn away. And I should contemplate this change to ease the pain. And I should step out of the rain and turn away.
In My Time of Need and A Fair Judgment from the companion pieces Damnation and Deliverance from Opeth. And Damnation was put out in early 03, Deliverance 02. And then Opeth, did a lot of touring for the Damnation record.
More touring than they wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think that led them into a totally different direction in a lot of ways. I mean, Ghost Reveries is certainly a...
Well, that's probably part of their success. I think getting out there and touring the States is a huge thing.
Absolutely.
And got picked up by Roadrunner Records.
Yep. They, the couple things
had
happened.
Their choice, didn't they?
Yeah, well, Music for Nations folded.
Yeah.
So they were kind of without a label, out of a contract. And, they found a label in Roadrunner.
Which was a bigger label, obviously, especially in the U.S. in terms of big, larger presence,
Right. I think a lot of people took that the wrong way. I mean, a lot of people immediately thought, they were going to sell out. They're on the same label as Nickelback and Slipknot, two bands that have sold over 1 million copies.
Yeah.
But you look at it from their perspective as support and everything else. It's not.
I mean, they were a band. They have to function. They have to have a label that's going to support them, and it's not going to go out of business every 5 minutes. I mean, Peaceville probably isn't financially stable enough to support them. And Music for Nations folded. So,
you look at like the fact that Catatonia has not been able to make more inroads in the U.S. and it's almost dumbfounding.
They had to finance their last tour themselves.
Right. If I remember correctly, Mike was saying something like, "I couldn't tell my mom I was on Nuclear Blast." I couldn't say it with a straight face. So, I think he he thinks it's a joke label. Mm-hmm. Even though they've made their place in the world here. Mm-hmm. I think he wanted something that sounded a bit more mature. I don't want to be a Nuclear Blast. Okay, great, Mom. Thanks.
Obviously, Roadrunner.
I mean, you look at the Roadrunner distribution network. Huge.
Roadrunner has a support network. Roadrunner has the clout. So they have they have the resources to push the band in directions that they haven't been.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, and now we've. I think the biggest difference you hear with Ghost Reveries that I hear is the presence of the keyboards of Pear.
Absolutely.
And probably, in my opinion, one of the most competent keyboard players I've ever heard in a metal band.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And the most well integrated. He's not just there to, pump up the volume in the background as they're going, or just as some kind of, filler. He's actively part of the band.
And several weeks ago when you and I did our best of albums of the year, and certainly Watershed showed up and we were talking about it. I mean, I think you made personal mention of the fact that, Pear really
and I'm a guy that I really don't like keyboards in metal that much. And he totally blows me away. Mm-hmm. He can actually, he brings the right sounds to Opeth. He brings like organic sounds, not
he's playing a lot more like organ and Moog,
not to beat up on
different things
Amorphous,
like that.
But sometimes they had weird choices for keyboard sounds.
It was very primitive in the early stages.
Right.
Or Nocturnus. You could throw them into the mix. So
well, and Pear headbangs better than the dude from Nocturnus. So.
That's true.
That's Panzer.
And he came from Spiritual Beggars, the kind of stoner rock project of Micah Mott's. I don't even know are they still around putting records out?
They're still around.
I haven't heard a Spiritual Beggars record probably since 2002 or something like that.
So. Well, the last record was quite good, actually.
Was it? I'll have to get a hold of that.
Yeah.
So
this is also the arrival of Axl correct?
No, Lopez is on this record.
Oh, that's right.
Lopez is on
this. He left after this, right? Or for the tour?
He left. They were going to tour, and he left after the.
Okay.
Mid-tour, actually.
So what musically would you say is going on here that I don't know, to me, besides the keyboard presence, what are any other things that kind of jump out to you that you'd like to mention?
That is a huge thing, because I think that for the first time, and I remember Mike talking about keyboards being not appropriate for Opeth. Mm-hmm. And finally he's sort of come to accept them, probably with Stephen Wilson being involved on Blackwater Park, Deliverance and Damnation. But I think that's the big thing. He's learned to integrate keyboards into the music, and I think that that's allowed them to explore a whole range of new things.
Mm-hmm. And you'll hear it a lot on the Beneath the Mire with the song that we're going to kind of open things up with.
That's kind of why I chose that song, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's really sort of, inundated and kind of, drenched in keyboards in a way.
Right.
Jens Borgen produced this. Borgen. And it's no Steve Wilson. Wasn't Steve doing a Porcupine Tree record? He couldn't do it at the time or something?
Schedules conflicted. And, Jens had done done a couple. I think he did the Catatonia record, and Mike and Catatonia guys are good friends, and Jens is a very meticulous guy. He's like very, very young, but very meticulous, and
there's a lot of clarity to the record. Everything's right on the forefront. It's a really nice production.
I was in Sweden when they were finishing the record at the studio with Jens, and when he was playing it for us, it was like just listening to the record on the studio monitors was just phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And watching it work with the Pro Tools application, if that's what he's working on. I can't remember if he was working in Pro Tools or not.
Probably.
But just watching him work through it and talk with Mike on the phone while he's playing the record and talking about the various touch points of the record. He's not a guy that just kind of come in there and just press a button. I mean, he's actively involved in it, making suggestions, pushing the guys. Which changed obviously on Watershed. He allowed the guys to be more open, whereas on Ghost Reveries he was militant. He was like a drill sergeant.
Did they write most of this before they went to the studio?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they were rehearsed and everything?
I think they weren't completely rehearsed. No.
Okay.
I mean, this is another one of those painful records for them because I think Lopez probably had some issues.
Well, and Peter was sort of kind of tired of the.
Probably Peter was sort of checking out, was starting to check out.
Yeah.
But I think at the same time, I don't think it was all written in before the studio, but I think Mike had a good portion of it, ready.
Yeah, because actually the interview on that latest live DVD that just came out.
They had everything ready before the studio.
Yeah, but Mendez was talking about how the worst thing is getting in the studio, like how tedious it can be.
Right.
Sitting there and doing that like live is the experience.
Right.
Whereas like Watershed, which we're gonna play Hex Omega off the Watershed record, to me this record. I mean, I like Ghost Reveries, and it really has like this distinct sound to it. But to me, Watershed was it was warmer. It was more experimental, and it just felt like this is exactly what Opeth needs to be doing at this moment.
Yeah, this kind of reminded me like the major label debut of Morbid Angel. It totally like blew everybody away. But what are they going to do for a follow up? Their follow up wasn't quite as strong, but this is like where Morbid Angel should have been with. I can't remember what the hell
with Domination.
With Domination, yeah.
I mean, and we're not talking in terms of like sounding exactly the same. We're not comparing.
No, but as far as like a big step, like they've got a huge, probably like a lot better recording budget on this, and just kind of like knocked everything out of the park. But I think they're in the same situation now as Catatonia and Bride and a lot of these other bands. Like, what are they going to do to really keep going uphill and not just plateau out?
Right. And I think Watershed was a great step in that right direction with adding the female vocals in, really
Natalie,
flexing the prog stuff out on Lotus Eaters, more than they've gone before. I mean, the melodic parts, like the Porcelain Heart and things like that.
Sure,
I mean,
if you look at the end of Burden where they're detuning guitar as they play, it sort of changes the mood of the song, tremendously, making it sound very pretty. And I guess Mike has sort of publicly stated he likes to destroy pretty things. A lot of people hate that. I mean, I know people who, when they hear it, they just can't stand it because they're detuning the song as it's being played. But I think it's kind of a cool invention.
Yeah,
I think that's fantastic. Anytime you can put more, roughing up something as nice and polished as Opeth can be, I think it's for the better.
Yeah. So I mean.
I think there's almost that the Baba O'Reilly organ piece at the end of Hessian Peel, the sustain thing kind of going under there. Not sustain, but the repeated note.
What about the tune we're going to hear, Hex Omega? What kind of aspects are working for you there, in terms of why you picked it, other than it being a lesser known song, maybe a less obvious choice? Less obvious.
Well, it's the last song on the album, for one, which I don't think a lot of people make it to. I think they listen to Porcelain Heart, they listen to Heir Apparent, and they listen to Burden, just because that's the newest thing, the newest video. I don't think they're getting to the latter portion of the album. I like the latter portion of the album a lot. And I think what I like a lot about this song is the ending, is the big build up, is the doom metal sort of procession. There's the ending of the album is very processional kind of thing, which I always like. Big fan of Funeral Doom, so it kind of reminds me of, in that way, of Opeth's version of that.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So I remember when I heard it in Cosmo Studio in Stockholm. I mean, it was on these huge speakers. They were being played for, the record being played for us by Mike, and it was just huge. Cool. It sounded massive.
Cool. Well, let's hear it. So we're gonna hear Beneath the Mire and Hex Omega. Enjoy.
Of his voice, years in your heart. One moment of doubt. Two lives torn apart. 1 second from held him in your arms. Your fever subside. Always safe from harm. Kept demons inside.
Vortex Omega from the Watershed record, and Beneath the Mire from Ghost Reveries, as we kind of wrap up part 2 of Opeth here. And we actually wrap up, I think, our last podcast with you, Chris. It's been a spirited adventure the last
3 months.
The last few weeks of podcasting. We're hoping that your job will still hire you back after taking this much time off.
Sure.
Me
too.
Obviously, you showed them the contract that you signed with us. Bad Mexican food. There were a lot of other things built into this contract. But,
sure.
All the water you can drink.
Yes, all the free water that we can offer you.
And cookies.
But we wanted to end with something kind of special, and you said you kind of have a story about this, and we won't quite reveal what it is yet. But, go ahead, tell us a little bit about the last song we're going to hear here from Opeth.
The last song, Opeth has done a couple covers over the years. They did, obviously Remember Tomorrow. They did Circle of the Tyrants. They did a couple on
the
Watershed, which DVD, we got to hear.
Yeah.
The Robin Trower cover, the Anne Fredrickson, I think his name, Anne Fredrickson, girl from Roxette, her solo, a cover of one of her solo songs. But I got to hear the Alice in Chains cover of Wood.
Because you were over there for Metal Maniacs, right?
No.
Or was it Decibel? Okay.
I was covering Watershed for Decibel. And it was late. It was the last night we were there, and we sort of befriended Axelrod and his girlfriend Natalie Lorich, who actually sings on Coil. Matt Okeson was there, the other guitar player.
We should probably also mention Axelrod and his introduction in Watershed. We kind of skipped past that.
We can circle back to that.
Okay.
That's a quick story. Long, quick story. So we decided to go back to Axelrod's apartment after we had been to like 3 or 4 bars, and that's what they like to do. They go spend some time at a bar, get a couple drinks, go to the next bar until they're completely plastered.
Is this the night of the Indian food eat-off?
It's not. It was. No, this was. Yes, it wasn't. It was the night of the Indian food eat-off.
Okay. Not a title of a horrible.
No, Martin Frederick Okeson and I have a Vindaloo challenge, which we haven't partaken in yet, but maybe that's a future podcast. So after the last edition. Bar, we decided to go over to Martin and Natalie's apartment in downtown Stockholm, and on the way there, we decided to get some Middle Eastern food, falafel, kofta, and got that stuff. We're on our way, and it's a long walk because no one wants to take a cab, or none of the cabs want to pick us up because we have too many people. So we were walking over there, and we get there, and we're eating stuff, and Frederick Okeson was eating, and he actually falls off the chair and spills Middle Eastern food all over his face and his chest and stuff like that. Pretty funny. So while those guys had gone away, Martin and Natalie perform a song for us, one of their solo songs, and then finally the other guys go away. They're talking about something else, and music or whatever, or trying to find a bathroom, I don't know. And then Natalie starts playing a couple songs for me. And she's like, would you like to hear, a couple covers? And I'm like, sure. So she plays an alternate version of Coil, which has a different vocal melody in it, which is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. It's not the one on the record. And then she plays Wood. And I had no idea that, that this is what the song was going to be. I didn't know they were going to Alice in Chains cover. Mike didn't mention it at all. He talked about the Bridge of Sighs cover. But I was pretty surprised. So I got to hear the song, and I wasn't allowed to mention it to anyone, because...
Rumor has it you mentioned it to some of your fellow friends, but that's just what a rumor has claimed.
Well, you basically it was a hush-hush thing, because I think that, the band didn't want it out there that they had recorded an Alice in Chains cover, because I'm not really sure if they knew that they could release it.
But the publishing and everything.
Yeah, they would have the publishing, the rights to release the song.
Jerry Cantrell wrote Wood, correct?
I'm
almost positive he did. So,
regardless of who wrote it, I don't know if they knew if they would have the rights to release it, either in any form, whether it's 7-inch CD or digital. So I got to hear it way in advance, and I was pretty blown away because it's a pretty faithful rendition, like the Bridge of Sighs cover.
The only thing that Mark and I had question about was near the end. Some of the
organ just kind of
the organ at the end just didn't sit right with me. And I'm a pretty hardcore Alice in Chains fan, probably the biggest of the three of us sitting here. And so I really liked it up until really kind of the last like 15, 20 seconds. But that's, just I've heard the regular version so much that it's hard to kind of get past those elements.
Well, I think why this song is different from the others, although the Fredrickson cut is quite good, because it's very bare and emotional, is that it's not a metal cover, it's not a progressive rock cover. I mean, it's just coming from a contemporary band that it's a hit song for one.
Yeah.
Well, I guess Bridge of Sighs is also quite big.
It's a hit song in the last
it's a hit
12,
song from
13 years.
Right, it's a hit song from a band that you wouldn't expect Opeth to cover.
Yeah.
But it's really kind of akin to Opeth if you think about it.
Sure, right, in some way, yeah.
I mean, I think Alice in Chains really got gobbled up into the grunge movement, but I think they were a metal band at heart that just sort of was, gravitated in. So
sure. I mean, instrumentally, I think it's a great song, and but Michael's vocals are really stand out on this song.
Yeah, he does a really nice job with both the Lane Staley and the Jerry Cantrell parts.
Right, and I'm not really sure if Mike Mike must be doing obviously the Lane Staley vocals, but it could be Per, and it could be Martin or Frederick Okeson.
It sounded a little bit
doing
like backing stuff.
The Jerry Cantrell harmony vocals, because they both share those vocals live. They share those backing vocal things, so they could either as a team could be doing it, or it could be one of the two doing the backing.
Yeah, and I guess that we should mention too that at this point they're one of the guitar players, the only other original member from the Orchid record, Peter Lindgren, sorry, has left before this record, and they brought in a new guy,
Frederick Okeson. Yeah, he was a touring guitarist for Arch Enemy.
Remember Arch Enemy until the other dude came back, right?
Until Christopher.
Yeah, he was sort of. I guess he was always the odd man out there.
Yeah.
Because I think there's always a vacant spot for Chris to come back, because that's who Mike likes to write with, Mike Amott.
And his brother, Chris Amott.
Yeah. Chris's brother. Yeah, he had left to
do Armageddon.
Not to do Armageddon, to pursue other things, whatever it was, to sort of stretch his arms out.
Now, is this the first record also with Martin on drums?
This is the first record with Axelrod on drums as a full-time member.
Yeah. And he's a member also of Bloodbath now, and
that's right.
Previously with
Witchery, and he performed on the second Satanic Slaughter record.
There you go.
So pretty young guy, or
yeah.
Okay, he looks pretty young.
Cool. Well, as we said, if you have any comments, if we missed something or got something wrong, please send us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Or if you enjoyed what you heard, please let us know. Drop us a line at iTunes, or a review, or at talkshoe.com. We greatly appreciate it. And again, Chris, it's been a wonderful last couple weeks having you be a part of all this. So
thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your knowledge.
Yeah, for the
and anecdotes.
Yeah, Professor Dockin and Dr. Opeth here.
Very boring.
Actually, correct myself. I think he played on the third Satanic Slaughter record.
Oh, see, look at Ever the Scholar.
We would just let it go.
Ever the Scholar.
No, he didn't even play on that one. He played on
Son of a Monkey. What's going on?
Yeah, he played on the
Nothing.
Vanished to the Underworld record,
which all of us don't have.
No.
So, and with that,
another Opeth records.
Yeah, another Requiem Metal podcast will come to a close here. So for the podcast, I'm Jason.
I'm Mark.
Chris.
Enjoy some Wood from Alice in Chains, Opeth style.